Ours was I guess we reacted to the local circumstances. We were looking, because of, I think, our experience through the dams debate, we were looking for a different way of looking at architecture than the one presented through the Barry McNeill, Lee Woolley, Rick LaPlastria school. And we were interested in the way that someone like Mike Viney locally seemed to offer a different way of viewing it. And of course we were being taught at architecture school a range of things, and some of them, really quite inspiring and good. We had people like John Anker, Sit Anker's son, showing us the beautiful collages of Mies van der Rohe and talking to us about a sort of 1950s, 1960s modernist, minimalist approach. And I think you can see that reflected beautifully in the work of someone like Craig Rosevier, who just does really beautiful pavilions. And in fact, the predominant architecture coming out of our time at university in Tasmania is a series of pavilion architects. And it would include people like 1+2, Craig Rosevier and Stuart Tanner, all of who have produced really quite beautiful pavilion works. But we were really trying to do something quite different from that. But we also had people like Barry Shelton, who wrote the book Learning from the Japanese City, who I think was helpful for us in terms of trying to rethink how you would read cities and how you would read things from a slightly constructivist perspective. How is the psychology of the place set up?
So how does then your personal experience of education begin to provide you with a framework as an educator on what to teach young architects?
Well, I think it's interesting if you look at the way that architecture education is treated by professionals. It's pretty dismissive usually, and quite often they're very quick to point out all the faults. But somehow
they just want office-ready graduates.
Yeah, but even reflecting on what made them great, they will often say, "Well, my architecture education counted for nothing, and I learned everything somewhere else." And I find that sort of a little unbelievable, and it's particularly evident in someone like Glenn Murcutt. And if you look at who taught him, he had two very influential people. One of them was Lloyd Rees, the painter, who taught architecture in Sydney, and he's spent time in Tasmania. I mean, his family's Tasmanian, and he's one of the people who used to float through the School of Architecture in Tasmania, because when he turned up, John Anker would get him in to come and talk to architecture students, and he just had a beautiful way of talking about light and landscape and how you read it and see it. And you'd have him one day and Glenn Murcutt would come in the next, and you would just hear echoes of what Lloyd Rees was talking about in terms of the way that Murcutt has a very beautiful way of seeing landscape. And then on the other hand, there was a guy, Towndrow, I've forgotten his first name, sorry, but he was the head of school there and talked about a scientific approach to architecture. And if you combine that with the Lloyd Rees thing, you've basically got Murcutt. So I think there is a tendency to want to reject what you learnt and to say, well, I discovered this on my own. But I think in our time of and the current higher education politics in Australia, it's very challenging for someone who learnt so much from beginning in a school that had 6 people in it. And that let anyone in. People like Craig Rosevier had never even been to matric, but they said, you sound interesting, we'll give you a place and see how you go. 3 years later, he won the National Architecture Award for students, and that sent everyone into a spin because it was only supposed to be for final year students, and he won it in about third year. And he's now published in Faden's top 100 buildings several times, and so it's kind of, it throws our current way of thinking about how you structure architecture programs into a spin. I mean, it's not, it's just not possible to run scales of education the way that it worked then in Tasmania.
But the way that you spoke to local practitioners sort of informed a position about practice as research.
Yep. And in fact, the academics who we were engaged with, particularly John Anker and Barry Shelton, drove that as an idea very hard, in fact. So they were people who were very interested in how practice and academia overlapped. So, yeah, I mean, those sorts of drives and sensibilities are important.
And I suppose then the move for you from Tasmania up to RMIT then becomes a relatively, not let's say natural fit, but a comfortable fit for you to actually bring in that agenda.
Yeah, I think in retrospect, there are many things that have been comfortable about that shift. One of them is that sort of opening architecture as an open-ended inquiry, and I think it's taken me a little while at RMIT to appreciate just how central that is to how RMIT operates. And of course that's been absolutely central to how Terroir have operated and how I've been interested in architecture from the very beginning in a way. And the idea of the project, let's look at an idea, a concept, a thing, and then let's develop that out in an architecture rather than seeing architecture as solving practical problems or something. So that's been a very comfortable fit. And then that link back to practice, that oscillation between practice and thinking, if you like, is I think also a comfortable fit.
So then this conversation leads through to an idea about a particular way of educating an architect, which emerges from a position that RMIT has held, or Leon van Schaik has held for some time, and now appears to be growing or evolving into a very defined object that's able to be communicated.
Yep.
And this notion of the three-pole position or the tripolar agenda to educating architects, or not necessarily just architects. Could you maybe talk about that a little?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are two models of schools that I'm very suspicious of. One of them is the school that says we have no dogma here. We're a school that is interested in the student, and we will coach the student to bring out their inner abilities. So we're a positionless school in a way. So we don't have a particular approach to designing. I'm very suspicious of those schools. I think it would be very interesting to see, for example, the equivalent in a sports arena. It just, to me, it just doesn't make sense. On the other hand, I think the schools that say we are about this become problematic because it really does narrow down the field of experience that students have in terms of trying to understand who they might be. So I guess I'm trying to have my cake and eat it as well. And growing out of our experience, the Terroir experience in Tasmania, growing up in that political debate about landscape, what I realised was that actually having to define your own position against the positions of others is really useful in terms of becoming very, very clear about what it is that you hold, and how it is that you operate, in our case, in space and think about space.